to another episode of Unlocking Astrology with the Key Master, the Unlocker, the one and only Sam Reynolds. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We did China, and thank you. I think, and somebody requested this, so I'm throwing it at you. Is there a chart for Palestine?
Yes. And Israel.
And Israel. Okay. What's the origin point? I remember my dad had a globe in his office. His office was down in the basement. So after he would come home from the store, his corner store in Newark, he would come home to his basement to reconcile the books. And in that office, he had everything from a giant safe with a gun in it. And he had this globe, and he had he was meticulous. And the globe, he would show me this place called Palestine on the globe that he had. And I never lost that, because that was a land that was colonized, I think, by Great Britain at some point.
Yeah.
And there were people there that had a nation, right? And they had a governing body, and they had leaders and a culture. So what's the origin point for Palestine?
So, that's an excellent question. And I just want to remind listeners that there are multiple charts for any particular place, right? Because there's multiple points of origin. And when we talk about a thorny place as Palestine in terms of its history, we definitely have multiple origins. So the chart I have is for the chart that becomes what we know as the state of Palestine from November.
Wait, when you say thorny,
So November 15th, 1988. But you brought up a very good issue or point, which is the region that we now call Israel. The whole region at one point was called Palestine, right? Which is probably what your father was also talking about, definitely before 1948 and before even earlier when it was more of a British protectorate, quote unquote, right? And so at the point that Britain decides to give it to the Jewish people as the state of Israel, Palestine, as we know it, becomes reduced, and the people who had inhabited that become more pushed to margins and into Jordan and Lebanon and margins of their former country. So the creation of the state of Palestine, which is what we're pretty much talking about now, is from November 15th, 1988, when the Palestinian Liberation Organization declares it as a separate state from the state of Israel.
And is that Yasser Arafat's?
Correct.
Okay. And as a kid, I vaguely remember, it's interesting living in America. Our geopolitical knowledge is first shaped by the country that we live in, but also shaped by the media, by our educational system, so we are conditioned from little kids to pick sides, and we're conditioned to say these people are bad, these people are good. I want to use this space to say all humanity is valid. Everybody has a right to live and exist. There are no borders around humans. And I feel like if we don't figure out how to live with one another, this whole human experiment is going to completely fail. The earth is going to be okay. She will regenerate and repopulate. We may not be okay. So I think it's important that, what do the stars say though? That's me talking, but what do the stars say?
Okay. So we have a chart for Palestine. We have a chart for Israel. I can do the bi-wheel for both charts. I know you gave me the power to share, so I will share. And I'm gonna put Palestine, the state of Palestine, in the center. And give me 1 second and I'll share it. Okay. So let me explain, because I know, as I mentioned a few times, when people are looking, it's one thing to look at one chart, it's another thing to look at two charts. So in the center is the chart for the state of Palestine, which we believe was formed 1:40 a.m. in Jerusalem and we could say Palestine, but for now it says Israel, just, in order to be able to locate it on the globe. And then it says Israel's independence on May 14th, 1948, 4:37 p.m., Tel Aviv, Israel. And yeah, so yeah, Israel's a Taurus. And people probably like, yeah, that makes sense. That's all I'll say for now. But
wait a minute. But it does. Go ahead. Let me just say, that absolutely makes sense when you say that, because there is a very, when people talk about Taurians being stubborn, there is an unyielding nature about that. And this is, for me as a Taurus, I always keep that at the forefront. And it's always a question that I ask myself: am I being unreasonably unyielding? Am I being, unreasonably stubborn? I always pose that question, because I'm always going to think I'm right. And then if I think I'm right, I'm doubling down, tripling down, and I will not be moved. So it makes perfect sense.
I mean, and without, like you said, getting so much into sides and just looking at it as facts on the ground, the nation of Israel probably needed to be at its incipience, because it almost didn't make it. I mean, it was, if it hadn't had the intervention of, military support from the United States and other countries over the years, and especially early on, the 6 Days War and other things, it wouldn't have been around, right? I mean, it was outnumbered in the number of countries that had assembled to challenge Israel. So that's a determination. That's kind of a testament to its grit, in being around, whether we want to feel it was justified in the establishment of Israel. At this particular point, I'm giving my opinion. We have to recognize that the state of Israel is here to stay. I know there's some people, even along some of my Muslim brothers and sisters, who feel like we just need to dismantle Israel. I don't think that's going to happen.
Their whole Jewish, the Satmars, one of the largest Orthodox Jewish sect, believes that Israel should not be in the space that it's true. Yeah. So I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. No, that's okay. But I don't think we're going to have the dismantling of that nation in our lifetimes, right? So I don't think that's a realistic aspiration and goal. And some measure of that is testified by the grit of that Taurian sun. Now, what I did test, because many people have used the chart of Israel many times, and that seems to be accurate, in terms of where it's pulled from. And if anyone's curious, it's pulled from when Ben Gurion, I believe the prime minister, declared Israel as independent. And this is a date that is consistently used, May 14th, 1948. Where I had some questions, because it was newer to me, is the question of this chart for the state of Palestine. But let me just show something, and this is the beauty of astrology. We talked about it. We're really doing synastry, but we're doing synastry between nations. So what we have, Israel is 23 degrees, 41 minutes of Taurus. Boom. On the opposite end, we have the state of Palestine literally at 22 degrees and 49 minutes of Scorpio, directly opposite. They're directly at opposition to each other. Now, you might say, well, don't opposites attract? Yeah, but they also can repel, right? And so there's being at odds and the experience of being at odds. So I think this chart is remarkably accurate in terms of it being a chart that we can use for the state of Palestine, what we're looking at in the center. And so I think it does give some testimony. And what it does testify is that the state of Palestine, the Palestinian state, is about to go through some serious, not just growing pains, but whether it maintains the solidity of its nationhood during the next 2 years. Like, even as this ends, whatever this conflict, as we can talk about war that's happening between Israel and the IDF on the ground in the Gaza Strip, whatever happens, whether this comes to some measure of truce, I do believe that the Palestinian state is going to go through a major reformation during the next 2 years or within the next 2 years. Whether that means that Hamas loses control, or
but Sam, I mean, we're watching it play out. We're watching it play out. So one could say, well, Sam, clearly, clearly, first of all, the Palestinians don't have any answer for the weaponry, for the military might, for the allyship that Israel has. Of course, it's going through something that probably will be irreparable.
Yes. So yes, but let's also talk about some, like I always like to talk about the facts on the ground in relation to the stars. The facts on the ground is that even though this is a very strong heightened conflict, the Gaza Strip has been through this before, right? Even most recently, I think maybe 2018, again, maybe 2014, where Israel has definitely been bombing. This is not new. What I think we're witnessing is not just Israel trying to flatline some aspects of resistance among the Palestinian people, which it won't be able to do, but it will try. But I think Palestinians will have an inner reckoning on rethinking, especially over the next, I think even it's starting now, on how they conceive of their future, which is different. And, if anyone's asking, I mean, people will ask, well, why? Why is this going to be different? There's a number of reasons, especially over the next year. When I say next year, I mean more so 2022. So this particular planet, Jupiter, is here at the formation of this Palestinian state. What has just happened is that Jupiter has gone into Pisces and what we call as a square. Now, Jupiter is going to go back out of Pisces into Aquarius, but then later, going toward the end of 2021 into 2022, he's going to go into Pisces again. And what I think that's going to signify is some measure of change within, I think, Palestine's enemy, which I would think is Israel, that would need to either accommodate going toward the two-state solution or the one-state solution. The one-state solution is where, Palestinians are integrated fully, and that we're talking about the nation of Israel. But things cannot and will not stay the same. So what I think is different is that we've seen this kind of level of devastation in different ways in the Gaza Strip, and true to form, this particular chart highlights a Scorpio chart, and Scorpio is very much associated with kind of coming up from the ashes and the phoenix, and also resurrecting, and has a very strong Pluto. This is what Palestine has been doing, in terms of how Israel has encroached on its territories while simultaneously bombing and leveling, and Palestine keeps kind of rebuilding. So I think it's going to be a point where it rebuilds, but it's going to have to restructure, and so it's not going to be the same. It can't.
So all right, what do you think is going to happen based on this chart? Based on this chart, you're saying there's going to be one state where the Palestinian people are going to be absorbed into what we know as Israel. There won't be
that's one possibility.
Or there'll be
the American, most of the world has been fond, including the United States, of fostering the two-state solution, allowing them to kind of coexist, and recognizing that. So, but, more and more people, including one particular person who I find very interesting, and I won't say I trust, but I like a lot. One particular thinker, his name is Robert Wright. And Robert Wright wrote a few books. Non-Zero is one of them. He does a lot of research and work related to like dealing with global politics and globalization and different issues related to that. But he's also of the mind and thinking more so in terms of this one state solution. When I look at this particular chart, and I think about the two-state solution. My concern with the two-state solution is that it doesn't really stay as a solution. It stays as, you know, more so ongoing conflict between two states in perpetuity. So, because there's just ways in which we maintain that at oddship between them, like that sun opposing the sun, and there's other things that also highlight that it's going to be hard for mutual ground. And some measure of that is that Israel may find it very difficult to resist being a destabilizing influence in this other state.
Yeah.
As I mean, when I
Because
say that, like
the
that,
territorial, I mean, there's a couple of things, right? The notion of Israel being pushed into the sea. What was it, the 7-day war, 7 days war?
mhm.
And then becoming victorious, and then it's like, okay, since you tried to obliterate me, we're going to push back, and we're going to keep, I don't see a solution here. Period.
Well,
I don't see any absolving this conflict.
well,
And I can't read the charts, but
right, but with and that's true to some degree. There's definitely what this chart testifies to is that there's lingering moments and points of acrimony between these two charts. Like if they were a couple, I would say, if y'all want to be together, you either perpetually have to be on the run, meaning like doing stuff and, having different homes, because there's some way in which you're always going to experience having some need for change, and when I say change, I'm making it sound positive, but since we're talking about two countries, we're talking about a certain level of volatility, especially one affecting the other, that always, is a destabilizing influence. They have several profound oppositions that find it very difficult for them to be on the same page. Now, when I say that, you might say, like, well, then, there is, like you just said, there's no solution. Well, the solution could be, like I said, it's kind of the same thing. What happens when you have, I'll give an interesting example. I think I'm speaking farther into the future, but I'll mention this one. So it's going to be a question in the 21st century and probably into the first part of the 22nd century, whether Pakistan and India stay separate countries. Right? Now, on some level, I think Pakistan has long been struggling to maintain itself direct relation to India. And they may be going inevitably toward a particular point of conflict. And so at some point, they may have to come together. Similarly, we saw a similar thing with Germany, right? Even though we saw the dissolution of the Russian, the USSR, it became apparent that East Germany was not going to be able to maintain itself in relation to Germany. So there had to be some way in which to come together as a similar people. Now, you may say, like, oh, well, that's not going to happen between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Well, on some degree, this is where we get messy at times in terms of talking about the nature of the conflict. There's definitely conflict in terms of the autonomy of the Palestinian people, but there are many people within Israel, Palestinians, who work alongside with Israelis, right? They are not so much in completely different worlds as we've been led to believe in the West, right?
I mean, they share a father,
Well,
biblically speaking.
Right. Also that in terms of their, Semitic history. So that's why, I was talking about that with some brothers at the mosque. That's why it's always weird when, Jews say to Arabs, you're being anti-Semitic. Like, why would I be anti myself? We're both Semites, right? So it's, it's just like, it's not recognizing that both technically are Semites. And so there's going to have to be a way in which they find a pathway to peace. Now, what I'm talking about, though, is that some measure of the change is going to happen within the Palestinian people. And this is not unprecedented. Those who are even cursorily familiar with Palestinian history will recognize that there are actually two radical groups at one point in, no, there are more than that, but in Palestine. There was the PLO, of course, but there was Fatah and then there was Hamas. Then Hamas emerged as the dominant figure over Fatah, and then took over. What we may be looking at is some measure of key destruction related to Hamas. That's what we may be looking at.
And
that sorry, go on.
No, as Americans, I was talking to someone and they were like, Biden needs to be pressured into, because America could end it just by withholding funds and weapons and things. America could have a great influence on what happens there. But I was like, Biden's not going. There's no benefit in him trying to solve this. This is a landmine, literally, politically.
Right.
So where does America sit? Or does she have a seat here?
No, I mean, we could look at it in terms of, we could draw up the Sibley chart, the American chart, where it comes in. But you're kind of highlighting a key point, because we're not just talking about being at odds by virtue of different people, and then also what Israel has done to quote unquote Palestine, or I should say to the Palestinian state. We're also talking about being at odds with ideologies too. So one of the reasons why the United States really does keep Israel there, it uses it as basically a cushion between the Shia and the Sunni, right? And Israel is now developing a better relationship with the Sunni, right? And being able to connect. In Iran was once a big sponsor of Hamas. I don't think they are now, and why that's significant, Iran is Shia in terms of doing that. So, the United States actually has more going with its diplomacy. Again, this is not my personal view. I'm not expressing this as my view related to the United States. But the United States, as you're saying, probably has a lot more invested in keeping Israel in its current power and even crushing Hamas than allowing Hamas to exist.